song will end eventually, I promise. Just going to fade it out ever so subtly. All right, guys, welcome. It's another Tuesday and another Note to File Live. Dr. Fox, what's up, man?
Hey, Brad. It's been a hot minute. Happy Tuesday. You know, it's a good Tuesday when we have a Note to File Live.
I mean, it means it's a Tuesday. I'll give you that. Very good. Well, welcome our guests. Kylie, introduce yourself, please.
Hi, everyone. I am Kylie Scheideler. I'm currently the Director of Site Intelligence at Avocare. Been in the industry for, this will be 14 years this year. I'm a pediatric nurse by training, and honestly, that's where my heart is. It's still there. But 14 years ago, I was approached by a family friend who said, hey, I've got he owned a site network and had a pediatric vaccine trial enrolling and said I could use a pediatric nurse to help administer vaccines. And that's how I found out about the entire industry. And
that's how they get you, man. They trick you.
So I would say I tripped and fell over breakfast into research. So yeah, I'm very happy to be here.
Yeah, it's always interesting. I feel like it's extremely common. It's too common almost. It's just sort of an accidental fall. And then, you know, a lot of people either stick it out. I think it's tough. It's tough at first. You know, that first year or so can be extremely challenging. But if you get in and realize, like, you know, all the cool parts, then you kind of get yourself entrenched pretty quickly.
Right. I feel like I learned everything the hard way. You know, SAEs have to be reported within 24 hours. How did I learn that? Didn't report it.
By not reporting. Yeah.
Yeah. So I started as a research assistant and worked my way up, spent 7-8 years in operations. I was a regional director for a site network, and just found myself like, I don't want to say not challenged, but didn't have that same motivation and wanted to stay in the industry, but see a different side of it. So the last 7 years or so, I've worked in feasibility. I've been a one-man band doing it myself. I've led teams, currently lead a team of 5. On the site side the entire time. So my whole perspective is sites. I haven't worked for a sponsor, haven't worked for a CRO, so that's where my heart is as well.
Yeah, we like that. Special place in my heart for the people who stuck it out on the site side. So props for that. So you have a team of 5. We're all working on feasibility?
Yeah, it is a dedicated team, so I know. And that happened not on purpose. Avocare historically was a network owned by IQVIA, and they acquired Benchmark Research and CCT Research. So all together, the teams came together, and I lead the team, and we have 5 that are dedicated to feasibility.
Nice. So yeah, there's a ton of sites, obviously.
Yeah, we have 42 right now. So, which is, I mean, it's an interesting perspective. This team, this is all we do all day long. But then you've got coordinators at the sites who maybe a mom and pop, and they wear 10 different hats, one of them being feasibility. So I think that's part of, you know, kind of what I want to talk about today is just the different perspectives. I have I created bitch buckets. We're going to talk about a few different things in buckets, but that being one is that sites are kind of treated the same from a feasibility perspective, but it could be a team of 5 for a network. It could be a mom and pop with a coordinator who's also doing budgets and seeing patients. And how do we all handle the same things when we're all so different?
Yeah. And even now, models are changing, you know, so much across how sites operate. And then you've got roll-ups and then networks expanding. And to your point, even us that are still on the relatively small side that are, you know, I'm just now kind of building out like a separate process with a different, I don't even want to say a team, but it is a team sport, right? Feasibility, because somebody in an office somewhere doesn't have enough context by themselves. And even a coordinator may not have enough context from a higher level to fill out a feasibility on their own. So it's a good point. I mean, it's doesn't really account for all the different ways that sites are set up. But I mean, go on. I want to hear some more of your buckets. Sorry, I don't want to interject too much.
No. So my first bucket is we'll kind of put 2 things together. Volume over the last several years has increased. The number of opportunities pre-award, post-award, you're seeing if It's pre-award, and IQVIA is bidding, PPD is bidding, Par Excel's bidding. All three are coming to the site with the same exercise of this high level. Are you interested? How many patients do you have? How many patients could you enroll? And then one gets selected, and now you've got a post-award feasibility where they're diving in a bit further, arguably way too far. Those questionnaires lately are driving me absolutely insane. And the timelines associated are, I need a response by end of business. I need a response within 24 hours. But what they're asking you for, you can't get in 24 hours. So it's these questions of how many patients do you have in your database that are left-handed, diabetic, A1C between 5.9 and 6, respond by end of business, and then on the back end, they're talking about how you can't trust sites because right, but by end of business, all I can give you is a guess. I don't have time to run the data, and some of us can't run the data. So the timelines are too short. When you've got a team like me, an opportunity comes in, and I assign a lead. But if you're smaller now, you don't have a team, a feasibility team. These are coming at you 5, 6, 7, up to 10 a day. All you have time to do is react. So it's this perpetual cycle of you can't trust what the sites say. They're just saying whatever to get work, which is a whole different bucket. This has become a game.
Right.
But timelines are just too short. So I would love to know, like, are sponsors and CROs sitting on it? Are they waiting till last minute so that it becomes a last minute for us? Or are they not sure when to come? When is the right time to approach sites?
Yeah, that's a good question. Obviously not clear to us on the site side, right? I mean, I have no idea, to your point, like what is their actual timeline on the back end. I will say this, like I can't begin to tell you how many feasibilities I was supposed to return 2 weeks ago that I returned, and we still get awarded, which just tells me that your timeline was kind of bullshit anyway. Like you were just kind of making it up. Again, not that we want to make a practice of that, but to your point, like I have nothing to give you. I have to ask a guy who has to ask another guy on the data analyst team to like give us, some codes, go from there. So yeah, it's a process. I can't get it to you tomorrow.
Right.
So you're gonna wait. But again, I've rarely seen them say, "Oh, you're cut off," and I honestly can't think of any situation where that's been the case, if I'm being honest.
Where they won't accept your answers because it's
right, because it's too late, right?
Well, and don't forget, I mean, how many times do you have to go, like, literally talk to your PI about a feasibility? Is this a good fit for our site? I don't know. You gotta ask the clinician.
I have to imagine that's later in your bucket somewhere, because there's like the actual feasibility part, and then there's like, okay, do we know enough to even want this study in the first place? That you've been hounding us to give you the same data I gave you for like 3 weeks ago for a different study, which again is a huge problem. But I do agree. I do think there's been a huge uptick over the last couple of years. Like we're just getting blasted, which sounds like a great problem, and it's not a bad problem. But when you're basically in a constant state of like heightened stress because somebody's knocking down your door for, some random numbers, it sucks.
Right. And if this is all you do, like from my perspective, it is so easy to burn out when everything comes in lit on fire, due end of business, so important, but you're given minimal information to work with. It's pre-award, it's a hypertension study that starts in Q3 of next year. I need a site list and I need enrollment projections, but I don't have a protocol yet. So all I know is it's hypertension. It's like, I can't spend more than, I will tell my team, if it's pre-award, fire something off that makes sense. If we know that's a good indication for the site, show interest. That's all we should have to do at this point. We shouldn't be running numbers. Wait until it's awarded. We have a protocol we can look at, and we can assess not only patient access, but like, how do we operationalize this? Are there long visits?
Kylie, question. Are you getting them to contact you directly with the feasibilities, or do you have to pull it from your PIs?
Both. I mean, I'm probably making more enemies than friends with the business development group, because I'm saying get in front of them, get it to come to my team so that we can say, here are the sites from our network that are a good fit, as opposed to waiting for our 42 PIs to forward emails that they've received directly. But it happens both ways, and it's a lot of trying to chase stuff down. And if they
business development team, so like you're in a very large, successful site network that's so specialized. You literally have a feasibility team, a business development team. That was kind of one of my questions: is feasibilities can bleed into business development to a point where, how does that relationship work between you and your business development team?
So for me, and I'm speaking personally, it's not the same across the board. So for me personally, I like to work, I need them to go find the opportunities that our site network would be a good fit for. And then my job is to work closely with them to figure out what the strategy is. If we want to get, this is a really good fit for 15 of our sites, how do we go about getting 15 considered? A lot of times, site networks will throw a ton of shit against the wall and just cross their fingers that a lot of sites are selected. And I like to be a little more strategic, where we have an idea of what package we put forward. Instead of saying, here's a list of 20 investigators, please pick a bunch, I want to package it as, we're going to offer you, we'll enroll 500 patients, but we need these 20 sites selected, and maybe here are some efficiencies that we can offer in this package, or discounts, if you will. Getting to that more strategic approach, as opposed to selling individual sites and crossing fingers.
Yeah, I did wonder about that. So yeah, that's interesting, because I mean, you have to have at least some, or do you sort of do it on the back end? Because you have to have some sort of knowledge of your sites, because obviously not all sites are created equal across 42, and maybe only 5 have this particular patient population, or whatever the case may be. And right. I've seen it. I mean, I've seen networks reach out, like sites that are in a network that they have a study that were clearly, I'm like, you just got it. You must have gotten this because it was part of some kind of network deal. You do not have these patients, which seems very confusing to me. But I guess that has more to do with whether you're being more proactive or sort of shoehorning in sites on the back end. You know what I mean? Which again, still must be challenging, being, a little bit. And again, I don't know how disconnected you are from operations, but I assume some. It still has to be.
We stay very connected. I don't want my team being a paper pusher. I don't want it where BD brings in an op and we're like, hey, ops, do you want this? Okay, they said yes. I encourage a lot more critical thinking about, now compile. We need to talk to them and get their feedback. Did all the staff quit yesterday? Is the PI retiring? Are you at max capacity with what's upcoming? We're closely connected and have regular meetings to understand what's going on at the site level. And some of my team have not worked at a site before, which is critical experience. If you're trying to help sell a site, you got to know how they operate. So they are very closely connected, but also tasked with bringing it all together for the network instead of just one site at a time.
Fair.
So, Kylie, I got a question, and this is something I know every site does differently. But what are your standards to say no thank you to a feasibility? Yeah, we're not interested in that trial.
This is a huge pain point of mine personally. It has become, from a site perspective, and maybe you guys have a different perspective, for the larger site networks, it's harder to say no. Executive leadership wants to know, why are you saying no? And they are going to challenge every reason you come up with. So it's a lot of work to say no. Does that mean we're taking inappropriate studies? No. But in this role, I like to spend my time coming up with really cool strategic ways of doing things that we're good at. And when I find myself spending more time justifying why something is not a good fit and why we shouldn't go after it, that's when I get grouchy, admittedly. We want to focus on things we can do.
I think that's, look, I haven't worked on a network of that size, but anywhere, I think that's a challenge in deciding what to say no to.
Right.
Even in the early feasibility stage, because there's also a number of reasons that you might, I'll say this too, we've been filling out feasibilities as honestly as we can. And there have been some that I'm like, we've seen 2 of these patients in the last year, right? And maybe there's some oncology trials with very hard to find populations. And still we have sponsors saying like, okay, do you want the study? I'm like, no, we don't. But then the doctor's like, well, they want to give us a study. Why aren't we taking the study? So you get pressure from all kinds of different sides. And there may be, I don't know, political reasons, or maybe it looks good reasons that you may feel pressured, or even again, sponsors who want to give us like almost forced trials on us where I'm like, dude, we don't want this. Please don't say yes. Like, we gave you our numbers and they were extremely low. How is this good for you or us?
Right.
So it's
And
interesting.
the amount of money that is wasted on activating a site that doesn't end up enrolling, that's not good practice.
And have you ever seen a CRO's RFP?
No.
Do you know how much they get paid to activate sites and to find sites and to review feasibilities and to do that whole managed process? Do you know how much money they get for that?
I don't want to know.
You don't. So that's my other, so we talk about pain buckets. Is number one is all this work you're doing, you're not getting paid for. You got to pull it out of your profits. You don't get paid to do feasibility. And you are you're the only stakeholder in this entire workflow that does not get paid for all of this work that you're putting together for the feasibility. Because again, it's going to the CROs, man. They're taking it, man. You look at those RFPs, it's crazy. But Brad, that's probably going by, they have their KPIs, like their objectives in their contract is to fill seats. They need to fill X number of sites in this amount of time. So if they have extra slots, they're going to be rewarded if they fill them, even if it's not necessarily good for the trial.
And again, I mean, I'm not surprised that, we've got some sort of misaligned incentive, because it seems to happen just about every stage of the way. So, okay, let's go back to the original problem then, volume, right? So what can we do? Stop doing feasibilities, do less feasibilities, be more selective? What do you think, like, what makes sense there?
The risk is so high to not respond. I mean, from a site perspective, you can't be deemed unresponsive, or you take too long to respond. That will hurt you in the long run. They'll stop coming back. So it's more of an encouragement to sponsors and CROs that, yes, you want to come out and get site feedback early, but are you actually using it? Is it valuable? What you're asking, which let's talk about feasibility questionnaires next, is the questions you're asking, the answers you're receiving, is it truly valuable? Enough to go out to the non-revenue generating teams, feasibility teams, that we're not getting paid for any of this, but we can't not respond, because then we won't come back to us. So find the sweet spot where it's truly meaningful to go out to a site and reduce the noise around it. Don't just tick a box to say we went out. If you don't need to, don't do it. And I just wait longer in the process, I guess. I understand pre-award, and if we're going to be part of your bid, like if Par Excel is bidding and they want Avocare to be part of their solution, then let's work together on that. But to go out to hundreds of sites and just ask high-level questions, we have to answer. But is that really valuable at that stage?
And not for you, for them.
Right, for them it is.
Well, that's it goes back to Fox's point. Like, they're going to use that to win business that we've just offered up for free, basically.
Or they're going to fuel a database that has nothing to do with the study.
Not necessarily going to use us either.
Yeah.
No.
You're not guaranteed. Yeah, you're not guaranteed to win it just because filled out feasibility. So again, it's all. Again, the more you look at it, the more I'm like, God damn it, we're getting screwed.
So, Brad, I have a comment to what Kylie said, but it resonates with what Kelvin recommended or asked. If you want to put those two together, I'd be happy to chime in. So Kelvin said, can you get a protocol synopsis and a slide deck while waiting for CDA to be executed? Odds are no, Kelvin. Generally, that's a big no-no. But one of the first things that I do when it comes to feasibilities is I look at clinicaltrials.gov and I look and see what they have out there, if they have anything out there. Your first reference. So that's all public knowledge. So it can't be covered under CDA. So you might be able to see, oh my gosh, yeah, this is a rescue site. Sometimes they don't tell you that in a feasibility. There's going to be a rescue study. So obviously it was hard to enroll in the first place. One of the things that is an absolute no-go in a lot of the sites that I work with is patient safety or patient benefit or potential patient benefit. Prime example is if a feasibility comes across our desk with a synopsis that takes a liter of blood from a patient for a sample grab, we say, no, thanks, this isn't a good fit for the site. Same thing with data grabs for patients, where it's really not going to help the patient at all. And it's literally just a manipulation of patient data to try to generate a database to look at something. Generally, we're saying, if it doesn't help the patient, they don't have a potential for a benefit, we don't really want to look at it. It's not really a good fit. And then you go into like screen failure ratios, risk assessments, how successful was the trial, all of that stuff that you put together to understand if it's even worth your time to generate a feasibility.
I mean, that's a lot of due diligence for you to do, potentially, because again, none of that may be very obvious or transparent.
Yeah, I mean, I don't have a team of 5. Oh, and the other one is we do have blacklisted CROs and sponsors where it's like, oh God, I know exactly what it's like to work with these people. I really don't want to work with them again. And so, when you can be selective, it's going to be the selection on the experience that you have as a site. You get to a point where you can't just grab everything. And eventually, the admins will know that.
Yeah, that's true. And again, I think we still like internally struggle with this of like taking versus not taking. So I mean, honestly, Kylie, I hate to say it, but I'm almost like relieved to hear it's still like a problem as you get bigger. Yeah. I don't mean that in like a bad way, but at least like, because I always feel like, well, it's because we're small. We got to like try to take all this stuff. But you just have a different reasoning or different people you have to answer to, as you get bigger as to why you may want to turn something down that may not necessarily be a good fit. And then sometimes it might be worth trying to take a stretch on something. We've seen that happen too, where you're like, I'm not so sure about this. But then once you get in, you're like, oh, actually, you know what? We were able to like problem solve and make something out of nothing. So again, that's why it's so hard it's hard to guess,
Right. And the needs of the company can change. I mean, there are some studies that I'll look at and say, guys, we're going to end up upside down. These people that know me know that I have quite an opinion of real world RWE studies that are just mining through charts because those budgets never cover the entire cost of that coordinator digging through. I've done the dig throughs, the hours of looking at medical records and transcribing. So those I'll raise my hand and say, look, guys, it's not a minimal impact to the site. And these types of studies will get backburnered when you've got several enrolling trials and this one's got a per patient budget of 15 grand. This one's 1,000. And what do we focus on this month? I mean, why take those if they're just going to sit on the back burner? But could you do them? Yeah, we could do them. Sites find a way.
Yeah, that is. I mean, again, we've done exactly that. I mean, when we started, we had a couple of those sort of, registry type studies, and the minute you get some true revenue generating trials that are, good for patients, sorry, we forgot about those.
Right.
That one's gonna sit by the wayside. So Fox, what does get a CRO blacklisted? I'm curious to hear myself. I mean, I've had good and bad experiences, and I feel like the more I learn, the more it's hard to blame it on a company versus like a team or even sometimes just a couple of people on a team.
Yeah. It's kind of like the foundation of the PAC score. That's why I did it. But there are CROs out there, there's sponsors out there they're very bad behaviors. We're talking about bait and switch. We're talking about non-communication. We're talking about non-payments. I mean, it's this different spectrum of everything. They're all not like nobody's innocent. Even the sites aren't innocent, but there does come, like we have one sponsor, a huge global sponsor. Everyone's just so happy to work with them. Oh, you should feel lucky to work with us. But they are known for sponsor audits that grill our PIs, that literally prevented our PIs from ever wanting to do research again because of these really aggressive auditors that pretty much interrogated them. And so we said, you know what, this isn't worth accepting these trials. Because we're literally losing trials because we're accepting this because our PI doesn't want to do it anymore. But it's extreme. It's not like you blacklist everything, but there are certain bad behaviors out there that can warrant it and preserve your business.
Yeah, that's fair. I mean, we've certainly sort of unspoken rules of like, oh, we don't want to work with this. Even sometimes very large sponsors, very, very large sponsors. And I'm like, I would just rather not, unless I just feel super compelled to by outside interests. But nonetheless, I'm with you. All right, Kylie, what else? You got another bucket?
Let's talk about feasibility questionnaires, because we all hate them. I would love, I think somebody commented on the share for this note to file, like, why can't we just get to a point where we have a 15, 30-minute conversation with the site? And I do have an appreciation that for a large scale trial, you're going out to hundreds of sites. You can't go have hundreds of one-on-one conversations. But you also, the feasibility questionnaires, I wrote down a few questions that I'm seeing a trend where they're asking, how many patients in this therapeutic area do you see in a month? Why does that matter? The questions don't even make sense to how we would recruit the study, or how many newly diagnosed per year. Sometimes that can make sense. Or how many do you manage? Like for a diabetes study, how many patients do you manage per year? How do you even run that report? Like
right.
You're asking questions that we can't use data to answer. So then we're talking to a doctor who's thinking about the patients they're seeing each day, not the whole practice, which is a big difference. So, and enrollment rate, okay, so we'll get to that in a second. How many patients do you see in a month? This one I'm seeing a lot. It doesn't matter how many I'm seeing in a month, because our recruitment approach would be to run a list of patients that meet that criteria, and then you reach out to them. We're not waiting for them to come in for their annual well check to say, do you want to be in a research study?
Right.
Stop asking questions that we can't answer, and then locking the field to where it only lets you put in a number.
Right.
Well, the month is not a large piece of time. Which month? We're talking December when everyone's on vacation and nobody shows up to their visits. I mean, you're going to have to, I mean, if it's at on average, maybe if you had a little bit more of a normalized curve. But I agree with you. Sometimes I don't think these questions are pulling out the right information for proper due diligence of the site. I think they're just trying to collect and fill a database.
Well, and to your point, Kylie, I mean, it's almost, it may depend on what your recruitment strategy is as to whether that question matters. Because, I mean, there are clinics that we may be sitting around screening on a week-by-week basis, but there may, obviously more ideally, you're getting a little more proactive than sitting around and waiting. But again, right, depending on what your preference is and how big or small you are, then that question could be completely irrelevant, or it could actually be fairly relevant. But again, there's no place for that, right?
Right. And the sponsor CROs coming up with these questions have it in their mind how they want to look at the data, but we all operate different, to your point, like how we're going to recruit the study. So wouldn't it make more sense I get asking how many patients are in your database, but that's only a part of it.
Right.
There's also outreach to the community. There's also advertising. So do you care about those numbers also? Why not just give me a free text box and say, here's a protocol synopsis. Tell me, how many do you think you could enroll? How would you go about enrolling this study? And let me just explain to you what we would do. As opposed to these locked fields. I spend so much time with my team where they're like, I'm looking at this opportunity. They're asking this question. For this site, all we have direct EMR access. Usually the types of reports you can run out of those are pretty high level, total number of patients with an ICD-10 code. If you have the opportunity to use tools like Beck Health, is the first one that comes to mind for me. Love those types of tools because you can actually build out the criteria, get much more narrow. But then how do you take that number and then answer the question being asked, because it's a locked field and wants a number, but I can't get that number. So I'll have to sit with my team and say, well, if we make an assumption that these 100 come in once a year, how do we break that? And then I can't even explain how I got that number. You know what I mean? Like, and then we have to take all the notes to tell the site, here's how I got to the number I put in for you, so that you can echo it at the PSV, because we can't actually get the number they're asking for.
Well, and yeah, and
how many times has your feasibility been completely off after you receive the full list of IE?
Oh, more times than I can count.
Well, and that goes back to, I mean, the people taking your feasibility aren't the same people who have to like come out and keep you accountable for the recruitment numbers you came up with. So how much do they really care how accurate your numbers are? Because their job's done. Boom, moving on to the next group. It's their problem now.
That's a good point. Is it BD? Is it CRO BD who's running the feasibilities if they're going like plugging it into RFPs?
Right. Yeah. And this is where I'm curious to Luke's point, like they're really ultimately they're doing it themselves. They're trying to collect enough data to where, they can really be determining feasibility, which I guess makes some sense possibly, but that might be why they're just trying to collect as many data points to narrow down to what they want it to be. You know what I mean?
It's why it's become such an unsafe environment. Sponsors and CROs are using feasibility for a different purpose than sites. I always equate this stage to submitting your resume. Completing your FQ, submitting your FQ is submitting your resume for why you should be picked to do the study. That's a different perspective. I would have, having never worked for a sponsor or CRO, but having talked to some people, I'm like, that's not, from a site perspective, we're trying to win work. Are some sites inflating their numbers to win work? They are. I'm not. That doesn't sit well with me. But is there that assumption from sponsors and CROs anyway? You can't trust what the sites say. They're just trying to win work. Right.
I've heard that recently more than ever over the last probably 6 months. Yeah. They're like, you can't trust what sites are saying.
But we've created this environment where sites can't tell the truth, because the truth is we can't enroll 50 patients in a week on a type 2 diabetes study. But sponsors are choosing sites based on the highest enrollment projections. So if I come in and I raise red flags and say, criteria exclusion number 3 is probably going to be challenging, not just for us, but for your study. If I start raising red flags that things are going to be challenging, and we're going to realistically enroll, 5 patients, and everybody else is saying 10, you're not going to pick me. Even though at the end of the day, you're going to sit on escalation calls with all of those sites who said 10, but they only enrolled 5 that I said.
So they're punishing honesty is what they're doing. Yeah.
And the more I sit in these types of roles, I see people saying, well, that's what we said at feasibility, but what is our goal? And I'm like, no, that's not what this is meant to be. You should be allowed and encouraged to raise your hand and say, this is going to be challenging, but here's why it's a good fit for my site. Here's what my recruitment plan will be. And here's how I'm going to go about enrolling patients. I don't even like giving enrollment projections. Right?
That feels like very much a dice roll sometimes. And that's where, and look, generally it's fine. And I'll, try to err on the side of being conservative, but I've made mistakes. And even now I've got, the old, like a year later, they pull out the old, let me dust this off. You said you were going to enroll this many patients. Why haven't you done it? I'm like, well, shit, man. I mean, obviously a lot's changed in that time. And that was the best guess we made at the time. And it's crazy to hold you accountable to that when you didn't know how this would operationalize. You asked for the number, I gave it to you,
Right.
So going back to put my legal hat on, there is no legal binding of feasibilities because you don't have any legal contract in place but a confidentiality agreement. As soon as you sign that CTA, everything the feasibility disappears legally.
But the amount of time you spend, I mean, the other frustrating part is that, like my team, I encourage, we do a thorough analysis when it comes to enrollment projections. If we have past experience, we're going to reference that, but it's only a piece of it. I mean, you could look at a past vaccine study and say, oh, we did 150 that time. Right, but we walked through every parking lot, garage or grocery store parking lot and posted, there's so many things you can do differently. We got very scrappy in that situation, or we only did 20 this time. It's because we were the last site activated and they closed enrollment early. Like, past experience is a piece of it. You look at your patient access and you can build a funnel that says, here are the patients that'll meet the criteria. And then you got to build assumptions. How many are going to answer the phone when I call them or text them? How many are going to be interested in participating in a clinical trial? How many are actually going to show up? I always say that answer can change. I'm generally open to participating in a research study, but if you called me right now, I'm not going to answer my phone. I'm busy. If you called me while I'm at gymnastics with my girls, I can't even hear you and I don't have the patience to listen. But if you called me when I was not in a meeting and I was clear-headed, I'd be open to listening and I might enroll. There's so many factors that can determine a patient's willingness to participate in the study. And how do you factor that in to an enrollment projection?
So Kylie, question, as you fill out feasibilities, do you know what the patient stipends will be?
No. God, you don't even see a budget until you're awarded.
No. So, and isn't that a factor? I mean, if you're going to give a patient 0 stipend, do you really think you're going to be able to enroll that?
Right. But we can't talk about money being a motivating factor.
No.
But
we can. We can. Yeah, everyone else can. But as sites, no. But you're right, and we've seen this from like, hey, man. Well, and even then, like, look, I hate to say it, but like, per patient budget is also going back to the whole real world evidence thing. Like, hey, cool. If we're getting $600 for this trial, like, how hard do you think we're going to try if it's not kind of easy? I'm sorry. We're just not. It's just not a good. It's not a good business decision, especially from a small site where resources are limited.
Right.
You're crazy. I don't know what to tell you. Sorry. So yes, money plays a big factor, and to Fox's point too. I mean, we're seeing like having to fight for what I consider relatively small subject stipend increases. I'm like, cool. You want them to do an e-diary every day for 6 weeks, and you want them to come in once every 2 weeks, and you want to give them whatever, $40 a pop, dude. Come on, like that's not going to work.
And these are a lot of times working people. This is a working population that has to take time off to come in, cover the cost of them missing work. You know what I mean? They don't see it that way. People aren't just sitting around at home. I mean, some are looking for research studies to be a part of, but generally speaking, this is a working population we're asking to come in during business because most of us don't work weekends. We can adjust, but.
So I just had a huge podcast interview with 2 people, and we did a live event on feasibilities. But I want to ask you, Kylie, the same exact question I asked someone else. We talked about the bins that we're concerned about, but if you closed your eyes, what would be your dream feasibility? Like your perfect feasibility ever, everything fell into place. What would be your perfect feasibility experience?
I would say it is that one-on-one conversation. Because I am so passionate about strategic critical thinking. Let's sit down, look at a protocol, be able to say what's going to be a challenge and what's not, have this safe environment where you can tell the truth. Let's not talk about enrollment projections. But that does not feel realistic when we're talking about going out to hundreds of sites to gather this intel. You can't do that. So we have to find that perfect compromise where we either, if it has to be a feasibility questionnaire where we're going out, fill it out on your own time and send it back, it has to be more open to allow that critical thinking and sharing of what you would do to enroll the trial.
And I mean, I don't know, to your point, I feel like a lot of the most successful things we've done have been things that aren't particularly scalable though. Just like that, like having a conversation. And not even that, I'm with you. I think I prefer that technique, even though again, I know it's not likely to happen in any scale, but not just that, but like maybe come to me with a concept of how the trial is going to work rather than just lobbing questions, because at least if you can explain through, even if they're just assumptions on the CRO or sponsor side in terms of operations, like that's helpful. Like we can at least start from a place. We can both start from a place where we can come together rather than just like, how many patients you got? You got a freezer for the 100th time? Yeah, cool. You still got the same freezer that you had last week? Yeah, we got it. Talk about the actual logistics of the trial, which again feels very thin. If mentioned at all during these parts of the conversation.
Yeah. And right here, you may have a synopsis if you're lucky. And so and even the people who are doing this probably aren't skilled or educated to the point where they can have these conversations with you. They're literally just pushing paper along. Right. I wonder, so Kylie, I've always had this dream, and I love what Brad said. Yeah, for the 100th time, we've got a freezer. I would love to see a world where clinical research sites had their own feasibility chatbot that sponsors and CROs could talk to, just for the basic questions that you have to repeat all the time. So like, why don't you talk to my chatbot? We'll ask you a few questions, see if we're even interested in this. And then he can answer all your questions about our site. And then when you're ready and you think you still want to work with us, then come forward. I know it's a giant tug of war on who's going to be entering data into whose database. And I get that. But the fact that sites aren't paid for this, I think is a huge justification to try to make it as streamlined as possible so they don't waste resources they're not getting recouped.
That's a great.
What do you think?
100%. I'm always saying we are a non-revenue generating team. We have to be very careful with how much time we spend on things. And if we're lucky, if we get awarded, we can try to put something into the budget to recoup, the effort we've put in. But other networks that don't have a full team, I mean, at the way that the volume has increased and how much more the FQs have gotten so long, some are 15, 20 pages long, and the data they're asking for is just insane. I don't know how mom and pop sites or smaller networks are surviving at this point. They don't have a dedicated person or team.
Yeah, and we just have straight up opened them and been like, nah, we're not even going to fill this out. Like asking about how many patients have tried like every different mechanism of action, acting drug, and we're like, dude, I'm sorry, but like this is already like a challenging therapeutic area. You have a 60-page questionnaire with like insane questions there's literally no way to find the answers to, so we're just we're not gonna bother.
But then once you get to a larger site network, you don't have that option. You have to figure out how to answer it. I miss that. Being able to just say no thanks. How do you guys feel about going back to enrollment projections? Because I hate it. I think everybody wants it. Instead, I think the focus needs to shift to recruitment plan. Instead of asking me how many I'm going to enroll, ask me how I'm going to go about engaging with patients, because there's so many factors that can affect that number, right? Altogether, stop asking for enrollment projections on acute treatment studies. Drives me insane. Flu treatment studies, how many can you enroll? I have no idea. It depends on how bad flu is in my area. It depends on if that really sick person has it in them to stay for 2 hours to enroll in a clinical trial, or if they want to go home and sleep. Like, quit asking for it. And then quit asking for monthly enrollment projections. Do you get that a lot? Like vaccine
accrual rates. Yeah, they call them accrual rates.
Sponsor CROs are looking at a patient site per month, which I get, but that's not how we recruit. Vaccine studies come and you go guns blazing out the door and you go, and then it might taper a little bit. And then when they're like, enrollment's closing, you go again. And I'm never going to tell you that I'm going to enroll 10 per month over 6 months. It's going to be a shit ton out of the gate, but you don't let me answer that way.
Yeah, and some of that does go. It must go back to the payment structures too, like how sites we don't get paid for the amount of effort that we put in. So all these recruitment plan ideas, they don't care. They just want to know how many patients you end up with at the end of the day. You could spend all day every day, but how many patients? 1 or 100? We just want to know. So again, I think it's just the incentives are different.
So much time though, like in escalation calls later where they're like, but you said, and now you're not.
Oh, yeah.
So what are you going to do different?
Like booster visits, and I'm like, hey man, nothing's changed. Like we're trying, we're busting our asses trying. I don't know what else you want from us. Get a better protocol.
It seems so. My frustration with it all is just growing. It's like none of this. Can we do things that are valuable, that are meaningful? Like we all recognize that it's impossible to commit to an enrollment number. And you don't even care about how I'm going to go about getting them. But can't we shift the narrative to talk about the recruitment plan, and then we will get as many as we can? You know what I mean? It's tough. I know that they use the information. What's funny is talking to someone the other day, they were like, well, we use the information the sites give to decide how many sites we're going to use. I said, but the sites want to know how many sites you plan to use, so we know what number we have to come in at to be competitive. Mm-hmm. Like it's such a game.
Oh, have you had the feasibility start collecting diversity data yet?
Yes.
That's happening. So selection is going to be on diversity now too.
Yep. And what I found with those questions coming, where we have a lot of our sites, most of our sites, we have direct access to the EMR. It is very common for them to choose unknown or patient declined, which then I can't make up numbers. I've had to communicate that this site has 40% of their database is patient declined. We know, generally speaking, that it's a diverse clinic, but I don't have the data to give to you, and we're not in control of that data. It's the clinic that enters it. So that has been a challenge too. Experience also, so tired of us. Everything is about how many have you done before? In the last 2 networks I've worked with, we've got lots of new clinics we've brought on that have never done research before. And it is exhausting trying to give them reasons outside of we don't have experience, but, I spoke at SCRS a year ago and stood on the stage and said, give sites an opportunity to give our butts. No, we haven't done this before, but I've got access to 10,000 patients an untapped patient population. They haven't had the opportunity. So I'm not sure how many we could enroll, but here's how many staff I have at the site. Here's the equipment I have. Here's the doctor who's been a doctor for 20 years. Give them an opportunity to do it. Our research staff have done it before. We're not just saying pick us with 0 experience in the industry, but it's so hard to sell naive investigators.
Yeah, I do think it's still harder than it should be, and especially to your point, when you've got all the infrastructure around it. And let's be really honest, like when it comes to recruitment, it's oftentimes the PI is sort of not the one driving recruitment. They can be, depending on the therapeutic area or whatever the case may be, but ultimately it's the team around that's doing a lot of the lifting, so to speak. So yeah, obviously PI oversight's concerned, but again, that's something that can be learned and taught, and it's not rocket science. So I'm with you. I mean, we see that too. I feel like it's getting slightly better with conversations, but not if you don't get the conversation in the first place, and you just get shut out because you can't put a bunch of lines on somebody's CV with research experience. But that's the point, right? We need more, man.
Right. And you've got feasibility questionnaires with locked fields, so you have no choice but to put zeros in all the fields, showing they have no experience with no opportunity to explain your butt. I have the infrastructure. I've got patient access. Give me a chance. So I think if feasibility questionnaires aren't going to go away, I understand that we can't have, 200 one-on-one conversations for every trial opportunity. I think we burn out of that pretty quick too, but we've got to open up feasibility questionnaires, and instead of thinking of what's important on behalf of the site and having them fill out the fields, just send a Word document and give me a short essay about what would you do with this? How many do you think you could enroll? Fine, but how would you go about doing it? Why should we pick you?
Yeah, it seems fair. And what do you think about? I feel like there's a couple sponsors that are doing this, but having a kind of more high level site evaluation. I feel like there's a couple of big sponsors that do this, and they kind of come in and give you like a once over, right? Check out all your stuff, make sure you guys are all legit, you're good to go. And after that, you're kind of like in, and the feasibilities do become very minimal. I mean, they still want to know about your specific patient populations, but at least they've started it by building a relationship, and you having somebody you can go to and talk to.
I love those sponsors, Brad. They call them master site validations. Perfect. And they come with master agreements. So I don't know if you've put any master agreements together, but I love those experiences because you go through the whole thing once, and then you just go through SOWs, and then the feasibilities you get have nothing to do with all the stuff that you say every time. So the cool thing is it's a couple sponsors, the big guys, they're doing it, but it's just not industry standard.
Well, even we're just now, I mean, we're small, but like I've been doing this for between 6 and 8 years of like building this network out, and just now finally getting those like relationships to where they'll come in and even consider doing that. So if you're a small site, I mean, you may not be worth that look, because you don't have access to a ton of multi-therapeutic areas, and you're just small. So yeah, but I feel like it's the best balance between the two. Because to Kylie's point, you can't pick up the phone and call whatever 100, 200 sites every time you're starting a new trial just to be like, so just talk to me about how your recruitment works. But you can at least start off with the relationship, get a picture of the site. Because again, stop sending people out here, IQVIA. You've done it 200 times in the last 2 years. Stop it.
Right.
We don't need to do that anymore.
We're just available to travel, and oftentimes haven't even looked at the protocol and can't.
Almost always. I don't know.
Yeah. We're awful, and I've heard they've not gotten any better.
No, it's almost always like, I wasn't supposed to be doing this, but so-and-so was over here, so I had to cover, and sorry, I don't know anything. I'm like, all right, that's fine.
Right.
I've just gotten used to it at this point.
Right.
And I feel bad for the CRA too.
Yeah,
all right, we're down to the last five. Sorry,
there's a more meaningful way to the whole feasibility process. There's a better way. It has become such a tick box driven game. It's an unsafe environment for sites. We're all trying to get studies, and we want the studies we know we can do. But we're almost forced to inflate just to have a chance at doing a study. I hope for a safer environment for sites, a level playing field, more meaningful exercises, so that we don't burn out of like, what's the point of this? And we're not making any money for doing all of this work. This is not a line item on a budget that we get compensated for. So we have to be better.
Yeah, no, I'm with you 100%. Again, it doesn't, at the end of the day, even if there's a perception that like sites want to inflate or lie, like ultimately that startup cost that we get is not worth the 2 years of booster visits and pre-screening logs and phone calls and everything, training amendments and training logs and filing correspondence. It's just not worth it, so we don't want to be stuck with studies that aren't good. We don't want that either. I promise you, sponsors. Fox, any final thoughts?
So my only final thought is that this is exactly why CRPN was developed, and we can talk about that another time. But what you just referenced, Brad, like so much waste. Stop coming out here, CRO. You've done this 300 times. The fact that you've siloed and binned every single trial in this project with its own little independent groups, do all of these things independent of everything. It's just ridiculous. So prime example, let's talk about company mergers, right? You buy a bunch of sites or you buy a bunch of companies. Do you allow every single one of those companies to have their own independent HR and finance and all these little groups? No. Odds are you'll create some kind of a centralized administrative group that can help everyone. That's what happens when things are supposed to get big and scale up, is they become specialized. They don't have everyone doing their own little thing. It's like herding a bunch of cats. So we'll talk about CRPN again later, but that's kind of like my opinion about it.
That's the idea. Well, very good. All right. Well, Kylie, thanks so much for coming on. Where can people reach out to you online?
Kylie Scheideler on LinkedIn. Kylie.Scheideler@avocare.com is my email. I'm open I'm all the ideas, guys. This is not, I don't want to take opportunities just to bitch without solutions. Like, I'm very solution driven. So if there's a great idea out there of how to make this better, more meaningful, I'm all for it. So.
And there are, to our points earlier, I think some are doing it better than others. So maybe it's worth coming back sometime and talking about wins, what good feasibility looks like versus just what bad looks like, which is most of it.
Yeah.
So maybe that opens up a nice opportunity for another episode in a few weeks. All right, guys, signing off. And we will maybe be back next Tuesday if I'm in the mood for it. So that's the best I can give you. All right, guys. Till next time. Thank you.